I'm going to show you how to make a French seam using a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So I've got both layers of fabric together and I've got the wrong sides of the fabric together. So snip either end your 1 centimetre seam allowance, okay, and then we're going to sew at 3 to 5 millimetre seam down the middle of here. So remember, you have the wrong sides together, not the right sides of the fabric together. So here I'm sewing a 3 to 5 millimetre seam allowance, just very tiny. Okay, snip the threads off and then go to the iron. Back on the ironing board, gently press your seam, and then what we want to do is to get a nice smooth seam line, so gently press your seam to one side. So my seam allowance is being pressed to one side underneath. Then lift your fabric up, and then what you want to do here is get the very edge of the seam along the edge. So just make sure you've got the seam right along the very edge of your fold, and then give it a gentle press. And then I'm going to sew from there to there, but before I do that, I'm going to trim the seam allowance down slightly. So if you feel your seam allowance is a little bit too big, then just trim it down slightly, because we don't want any raw edges poking out from the other side when I've sewn the second seam. So again, when you're doing a French seam, you put the wrong sides of the fabric together to start with. It's not obvious on my fabric because it's the same both sides. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew at the 1 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so now it's another 5 millimetre seam allowance all the way down to the bottom edge, and then back stitch. And this hides the raw edge on the inside. So at this point I've got the right sides together. And when you open it up, you have your seam. So this French seam is suitable for transparent fabrics such as chiffon or organzas as well, or lightweight fabric where you don't want a heavy overlock seam on the inside. As you can see, you've got a very nice neat seam inside, which is about 5 millimetres wide, and then your normal seam on the outside.